Thank you for joining us on the podcast and sharing your story with us. As I think our listeners are going to hear in a few minutes, what a crazy story. Can you take us back to the beginning of perhaps your early childhood and your memories of the arrest of the kindergarten teacher before you even knew what was going on, just your earliest memories?
Hi, Neil. So thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and talking to you about this book. And yes, actually, this book starts with my earliest memories from my kindergarten teacher. She was called Tante. I called her, and all my friends called her Tante Liselotte. She was an Austrian. She was middle age, I don't know, maybe 50 at the time, and she was very kind to us. She spent the whole day with us, like kindergarten teacher, was the main teacher, the only teacher, our reference. And I went to a German school here in São Paulo, and yeah, this was it. It was a very
Normal.
safe place for me, very normal. This was my routine as a child. I remember us like playing around, all these flowers, the grass, the big windows from my class, how my teacher protected me when I didn't want to play with other children, and so on. So she was pretty normal, this
And then
kindergarten
the
teacher.
day she was arrested, do you remember that?
Actually, she suddenly disappeared from school.
Ah,
So
so she just disappeared. No one knew what had happened.
Actually, she disappeared from school, and what we knew was that something very bad had happened. And all the adults were mentioning the name Mengele. And of course, I had no idea who he was, but I was sure that something very bad had happened and that this guy was evil and that my teacher had done something very, very bad, something very wrong, but I didn't know what she had done. And then we lost our teacher, and this was the main part for me at that time. But this story always kept in my mind, and I wanted to know what happened and so on, and why she did what she did, and what Mengele did as well, because I didn't
When did it
understand
become
much.
apparent? When did it become apparent to you, the story? And can you relate what actually what she was found guilty of for those people who haven't yet read your book? And what was the process of discovering that?
So I'm sorry, the process of discovering that Mengele was here in Brazil?
Was in Brazil and the involvement of your kindergarten teacher.
Yes, sure. So Mengele died here in Brazil, in Bertioga. That's a beach close to me, 2 hours drive. It's very common to go like to Bertioga here for us. Brazil, it's a huge country, so 2 hours drive, it's pretty close. And Liselotte and her family, they rented a house in Bertioga, and they invited Mengele to spend some summer days with them there. This was February 1979. And then they were swimming, and Mengele used to swim very well, but at this day, on this day, he wasn't feeling well, and then he started raising his hands and asking for help. And so maybe very very probably he had a stroke while he was swimming. And then this family, my teacher's family, tried to save him, but they couldn't. And so Mengele died while he was swimming, and he died on the beach in Bertioga. And Liselotte's husband, Wolfram, who was also an Austrian, he tried so much to help his friend that he also became very ill. He had to go to the hospital. He wasn't feeling well at all. He almost died actually because he was trying to help his friend. So from this you can sense like how much they supported Mengele. And when the police came and so on, Liselotte didn't give Mengele's real name. He gave the false name, the Wolfgang Gerhard name, the documents and so on. And so he was buried under a false name in 1979. And so she thought this story was buried and that no one would find it out, never, because he was buried in Budas Artes Cemetery, which is a very, very small cemetery, also here very close to my house, like half an hour from here. And so she thought it was over. And then in 1985, there was a mock trial in Jerusalem, where you're speaking from. And that was organized by Mengeles victims. So this case got a very huge attention, and all governments involved, the Israeli government, the German government, and also the US government promised that they were going to work together to find out where Mengele was. So after 40 years from World War II. So all these police forces and all investigators came together, and after 2 or 3 months, I think, the German police got the report that Mengele was in Brazil, and that he was maybe living. They weren't sure if he was still alive or if he was dead. Here in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is a neighborhood like 3 kilometers from my house. So the German
In
police.
Brazil, not in New York.
In Brazil, yes. I'm speaking from São Paulo, Brazil. São Paulo
Yeah.
is the biggest city in Brazil. It's not the capital, but it's the financial city and the biggest city. And so the German police had a phone call to the Brazilian federal police, and then they came to this Brooklyn neighborhood, and they got to my teacher's house, Liselotte's house, and they were asking for Mengele. And then she told them, he's dead like for 6 years, and he's buried in this Embu cemetery. And then the police said, great, let's go there and do an exhumation. And so all of the world, all reporters, all this big media attention went to this cemetery, and they exhumated Mengele's body. It wasn't the body, it was the skeleton. And so after 6 years that he was dead, they discovered that he was buried here in Brazil. And he was still hunted all over the world. He was the most hunted Nazi, you can say, in history, because he fled.
How was Mengele living in Brazil at the time before his death? You said he had a false identity. Do we know now what he was living, how he was living? Did he work? Did people suspect him? Did he keep quiet?
Actually, he spent almost 20 years here in Brazil, so it was quite a long time. And during this time, he lived in many different places. But his last 4 or 5 years, he was living on his own in a house here in São Paulo, the capital, because São Paulo is a province and also a city. So he was living here in the capital, nearby a reservoir, where there's many people, like middle-class people, have their country houses there or had their country houses there, but also a lot of poor people went to live there because it's in the suburbs. It's very far from the city center. And he was living there on his own, and he kept his expatriate friends. They were the Bossert family. They were expatriates. They were from Austria. And also he had another family he was friends with, the Glave. They were of German descent. And also he kept contact with Hungarian family, the Stammers. He lived with this family for 13 years before going to live on his own here in São Paulo. So he had some contacts, and also he had contact with Wolfgang Gerhard, who was his best friend, and also who gave him all the documents that he lived here in Brazil. And he died under this false name of Wolfgang Gerhard, who also was an Austrian. And this guy was pretty much a Nazi. He was but he died in the 70s, so he died before Mengele. But he was Mengele's best friend here in Brazil.
For you, when you discovered this, what was your takeaway In other words, it became clear that he was surrounded by people, he was helped by people in Brazil. How did it affect you?
There are some people that believe in ideologies that are evil, that are racist, that don't do good for humanity, and they believe in this. We have this nowadays as well. So for me, it's this people that don't do much reflection. They don't think about like the bigger picture. They kept their ideology that they had. They all came from Europe. They weren't Brazilians. They all came from Europe. The people who helped him and who knew his true identity. They were all Europeans. So they kept their ideology, the same ideology they had under Nazism. But the Hungarian family, they were natives. They were fleeing communism in Hungary, but they didn't know who Mengele was from the beginning. They found out it later. They found in the beginning, they thought they were harboring like a Swiss refugee. And they needed someone to help in their farms, the Hungarian. So they kept him. They found out it later. And then they said they were threatened by Mengele. So that's why they kept him living with him. But during my research, I found out that it wasn't just like that. They had also a financial relationship. Like for example, Mengele helped to buy one of the farms that they used to live in Serra Negra. It's a town in the countryside. So Mengele gave money to buy this property. And also they had some business together, Mengele and this Hungarian family. This was something that the Brazilian Federal Police didn't investigate at the time. This is a pity. But we have some hints from the letters that Mengele wrote during the period he was living here in Brazil, and also the letters that he received during this period, like in the last year, in the 70s.
What was perhaps one of the most surprising documents you discovered during your research to write your book?
I think the letters, yes, of course. Also, the Mossad archives that were opened in Jerusalem in 2017. This was super great, but you also have access to this. But something that I had access that were the letters, and these letters were forgotten in the Federal Police Museum in Brasilia, which is Brazil's capital, and there were dozens of letters. And from these documents, you have a great insight of Mengele's last years here in Brazil, like the way he fought, the way he had his relationship to his friends, his fears, the things he liked to do. And there are even some funny things, like he says that he loved soap operas, and soap opera is something very, very Brazilian. And he reveals that he watches all three soap operas that went on television at that time, from 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and 8 o'clock. So you imagine this war criminal watching
Watching
soap
television.
operas, something very weird.
Yeah, it's very much that concept of the banality of evil, where someone is evil yet at the same time continues with normality and everyday activity, like watching soap operas. How crazy! That must have been a crazy discovery. How did you feel?
Actually, many people raise this aspect of the banality of evil. I don't put this in my book, but I think like after reading all his letters and so on, you can sense like the complexity of human beings, because he was evil. He did some horrific things, and at the same time he could do some very common things. So you just think, how can the same person do both things? Like, how can he be in peace after all he did, you know. And while I was reading all his letters, I was trying to find some part where he regretted what he did, or some comments about, you know, I cannot sleep at night because of what I did in Auschwitz that on that day or on that night. But he doesn't mention anything about this, you know. So this is, you know, this is so crazy. You think
Right.
it cannot be it seems it's not the same person, but it is. And something you can feel from the letters is that he kept his racist views until the end of his life. And here in Brazil, he didn't meet many Jews, but he kept his racist views against the Black people. And Black people, there are a lot of people, Black people here in Brazil. So he kept his racist views against them.
If there was one thing that you hope someone takes out of your book, what would it be? What's the central message?
I think I learned a lot with what I research. There are many aspects you can learn from the book, like since the medicine in the Third Reich, you can learn about Auschwitz, you can learn about the Nazis in Latin America and so on, and their network. But what I think it's the most important part is that the victims, Mengele victims, they didn't forget what he did. Even when justice didn't do anything in many countries, in Germany, in Israel, or in the US, or even Poland, they didn't manage to do anything. The victims didn't forget what this war criminal did. So I think this is the most important message. I think war criminals cannot go unpunished. And this what happened to Mengele. And the world only found out that he was buried here in Brazil because of the victims. As I said before, this mock trial organized by Mengele's victim was what gave momentum for his search. And that's why the police found out that he was buried here in Brazil. If it wasn't for the victims, we wouldn't find out that he was buried here in Brazil, and we would never know the end of Mengele. So nowadays we have a lot of war criminals, for example, Putin and now Bashar al-Assad, for example. So I think these people cannot go unpunished, and the victims must be heard.
On that, thank you very much for sharing your story. I'm sure all of our listeners are going to be rushing to buy the book, and details of how you can get it. And it's now in how many languages, did you say? It's been translated?
13 languages. It was published in the US, Brazil, Portugal, Netherlands, Hungary, Poland, and it will be also translated to many other languages like Russian, Italian. So I'm very happy about that.
So good luck with the book. I think it's an important contribution. Thank you for being with us. And all the details of the publisher, etc., we'll put below this podcast. So thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Neil.